it's weird having those conversations with somebody one day and then you never hear from them again. There have been several authors that like I connected with my debut year, and it's not even 3 years later and they're not around anymore.
Hello, folks, and welcome to Author Adjacent, a show about the journey from hobbyist writer to professional author. I'm your host, Michael Vadney. I'm sitting here with guest James Lloyd Dulin, author of the Malitu series and contributor to the Ethos anthology that was on Kickstarter and, whoa, did a bunch of cool things on there. So we do like that. Welcome to the show, James.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here and chatting with you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I actually reached out to you to be on the podcast that you used to run. I didn't realize that you had decided to step away from that.
Yeah.
But then, hey, we got you on here, so we're still chatting. I'm still getting what I want.
Yeah, exactly. The Dragonfire. I was almost forgetting the name of the old podcast. The Dragonfire Podcast. It was a lot of fun. I mean, I was with my friend Nathan Klimbara, who's a reviewer, and we did a lot of interviewing and things like that. It was just really hard to keep up with everything. We had made a commitment that anybody we had on, we were going to read their book, and we just got like way too backlogged and made more commitments than we can actually hold up, and it got to be more work than it was bringing joy. So we took a step away.
Oh, that's a good thing to recognize in yourself, because
Yeah.
if you continue to push yourself in any creative space that you're no longer enjoying, that's like a quick road to burnout.
Yeah. And it had always been, I had never set out to do a podcast. A few months after I published my first book, I had somebody from a blog reach out to me and ask if I wanted to co-host this podcast that was associated with the blog. And the blog outlived the podcast outlived the blog for several months, and we just kind of transitioned away from being associated with the blog and did our own thing. But I had never set out to be a podcast host, and then it just ended up taking away time from writing. And for Nathan, he had other commitments as well, and so we just we called it quits. But I had a really good time doing it because it was cool talking to some authors. It was really fun the first few times we got we got arcs in the mail from like Macmillan or something like that, and like, this is kind of cool. But then the homework assignment of it started to get too much. Of like, now they're sending you books and you have to read them.
Yeah, that is one of the hard things about doing all of this, because you want to be familiar with all of your guest work, and I do try to read as much of I can before a guest comes onto the show, but it doesn't always work out, because you do have all of these other responsibilities where you have work, you have family, you have life, you have to take care of your pets, and you have to do all of these things before you can do your creative endeavors, and that can be rough. It's really hard to balance that.
Yeah. And when you're talking about the idea of becoming a professional writer, I mean, that's the whole thing. Is you would love a world in which you didn't have another job that you had to dedicate all your time to, and you could focus so much time and energy on your creative work. And at least right now, from where I'm standing, that sounds like a dream world where I was able to write full time. But then I'm sure there are the downsides of becoming a professional and having to fully rely on your creative craft for income and things like that.
Yeah, like there are a lot of pressures. It turns it into a job. And I don't think a lot of people really understand what that means, to take your art and make it a job.
Yeah.
It's hard. Like, you have to do it even when you don't feel like it.
Yeah. I was my first convention I ever went to was this last Worldcon, and I just got to meet a lot of really cool people. And one of the people I connected with was, gosh, I'm forgetting his name right now. Evan Lakem. Evan Lakem, who wrote Anji Kills the King. Um, and he's also a content creator, is mainly on TikTok, I think. And he does a lot of reviews there. I think it's Reviews Kill the Book or something like that is his channel. Um, and we were just talking, and he was kind of off this whirlwind tour where his like tour just kind of sent him around to a bunch of different places as a debut author, like sink or swim kind of thing. Like, and he was very grateful for it, but it's also, that's a huge thing for a debut author to just kind of go out there, try to hold your own. I think because he's a content creator, there was a lot of faith that he was going to be able to hold his own, because I think he had a stop where he was interviewing Joe Abercrombie. I'm like, really cool things he got to do, but also you're on a whirlwind tour, kind of trying to sell yourself and trying to sell your book and hoping you don't fall flat on your face. And there's a lot of pressures there.
Yeah. Yeah, wow. I could. That's very much a sink or swim situation,
Yeah,
but there's just so many things like that when you get into writing and trying to be an author, because you have to learn how to do all this stuff, and part of it is the marketing. Whether you go traditional or indie, you
yeah.
now have to do that, and that's a hard thing for a lot of people.
I think that's the hardest thing about it. You'll never know before you publish your first book how much other things you never thought would come up, come just immediately demand your attention. Um, so it's one of the things I, when people ask what advice do you have for people who are debuting as an indie author, it's like, put it off until you have a secure amount of work that you feel like you can release, because you don't know how much things are going to demand your time, especially in those first few months where you're trying to get your book off the ground. um, you're doing podcast interviews, you're like trying to do virtual book tours, you're trying to put together ads and figure out what Facebook ads are and Amazon ads are. You're trying to figure out a lot of different things, and it ends up taking up more time than the writing. And unfortunately, that's not what drove us to do this job. It's not the marketing that we are here for.
Yeah, for most of us, we just want to sit in a room and tell stories and hope people want to read them. It'd be
Yeah,
nice if we could just throw them out into the ether and just make that happen.
wouldn't that be
And
great?
oh yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm actually in the middle of all that process right now. I'm like, as of this week, trying to get through like the final edits of my
Okay.
debut. I'm planning out my digital tour and everything, and trying to learn how to do all of these new things that I've never done before.
Yeah.
And it definitely is stressful. But I've learned that as soon as I accepted, like, this is part of the job that I want to do. Like, I want to be an author. I want to
Yeah.
be that person. And unfortunately, being that person means I have to do this pile of other stuff too.
It's true.
And that makes it a lot easier to swallow.
Yeah, I think there's an acceptance part of it, and then I think there's also at at some point down the line you're going to kind of figure out your own pacing and what you can take on and what you can't take on. You can't say yes to everything. Um, at some point you have to accept that you're not going to be able to focus as much time on this, that, or the other, and that you're going to have to either focus more time on writing or more time on marketing, and you got to make that decision. So it's very much an equation that you have to figure out for yourself. And so it's a hard lesson to learn. And I think everybody learns at their own pace and figures out what that means for them. Some people take off and do amazing their first year, and other, I did fairly well, but I know that if I plan on this being a long-term thing, it's going to be about having a longer backlist and a backlog of books and getting out more in terms of that. No amount of just throwing money at Facebook ads is going to blow up my book like I'd love for that to happen. So it's going to be about more writing and creating more pathways to my work. And so I know my plan at this point is going to be a longer term plan. And unfortunately, I didn't come out the gate selling 20,000 copies in the first day. that would have been lovely. But that wasn't my story. And so I think you find a lot of people that when they find that reality, you release the book and it didn't blow up. You're not the next Ryan Cahill and you're just selling, selling, selling. He did a lot of work to do that, but he also, hit some lucky bumps. He read the market right. He did a lot of things that took him along a path. Um, but once you figure out if you're not going to be that, what's going to happen? There are some people that kind of just drop off the face of this community. It's weird having those conversations with somebody one day and then you never hear from them again. There have been several authors that like I connected with my debut year, and it's not even 3 years later, and they're not around anymore.
Yeah, this is an industry that rewards endurance and patience.
Yes,
Like
but it
if
also
you could,
rewards churn. You need to keep on
yes.
releasing, and that's a heavy demand.
Oh yeah. Like man, there is just a lot of demands to make this happen, but at the same time, we all still have this dream and we keep throwing ourselves at it.
But I think
Uh,
that's kind of the beauty of it, right? That we all love stories enough to dive into it.
yeah.
Um, that I mean, at this point, it's not even about this dream of breaking out for me. It's just I love telling stories, so I'm gonna keep on telling stories. And I was lucky enough to find a fairly sizable readership with my first couple of books, and I'm going to keep on growing that readership little by little by writing new things and getting them out there. You mentioned the ethos anthology. Hopefully, that brings me to some no people. I'm really really proud of that. No, it's really a short novella, not a novelette, because it just breaks the barrier there.
There's
Um,
some gray space that
there's
we're
some gray
working with
space.
here.
Yeah, it's just a little over 20,000 words. Um, but I'm really proud of that story. And I had a friend today, Tatiana Obi, who wrote Sister Samurai. She just reviewed the anthology, and she said that my story was one of her favorite short stories of the year. And like, it's very gratifying to see um, people coming to your work in new ways. And I'm hoping that that will be a new entry point as well, and will potentially come back to that world and other stories going forth. But yeah, there's a lot of crap that comes with it all. But I love the stories enough, and I love telling, uh, getting that chance to kind of live in those worlds and tell it, and get the feedback from readers that they enjoy living in the worlds as well. That it makes the monotony of marketing and all that worth it.
Yeah. Man, yeah. Like you really just got to keep digging into it and just continue onward, knowing that it is worth it. That you love the process. Like if you
Yeah.
love the process, you love telling stories, then the rest of it can be dealt with. You can make that work as long as you keep loving to tell stories. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your series?
Okay. Maybe we should have started there.
Probably.
um,
Sorry, people, running slow today.
that it happens.
Yeah.
So Malitu is a trilogy. It starts with No Heart for a Thief, and it follows the story of a recluse warrior, Kalo, who has abandoned the war he started, and he's pulling back into it when he comes across a young war orphan, Tayan, who's hell bent on revenge. And it is the story of them trying to find a semblance of self and culture in a world that's been stolen from them by a colonial empire. So it's a very intimate story in an epic world. There's, you know, multi nation wars happening, but it's also this just intimate story between a mentor figure and his mentee, and trying to figure out how to deal with anger, how to deal with this sense of loss, both the personal loss of people around you, but also the sense of loss of culture and community, and the loss of what could have been when so much is taken from you and your people that you mourn the what ifs. And so it's a lot of dealing with that trauma and that grief and trying to survive it. So that's what the story is, and there's definitely fun magic battles and all of that, but it's also a very heartfelt and introspective story.
That sounds absolutely beautiful. I'm not gonna lie. And your covers, I've seen them all. They are also quite stunning. They're very visually pleasing. Like
Thank
they
you.
pop, and I'm a big fan of that. Oh man, I love that you zeroed in on what was important about the story. Like, yes, the setting and the world building is important to it, especially in fantasy and sci-fi. And yes, the magic is interesting and fun as it should be for a fantasy story. But what you talked about was like the characters, who they are, and what they're dealing with in order to become who they want to be or who they will be.
Yeah.
And that's the heart of it, man. That's good.
And it's funny thinking about it now, but I remember finishing my first draft like 6 years ago now of book one. Um, it was my first entree into long form writing. I used to write poetry all the time and loved reading fantasy, but had never thought of writing it, or thought of writing it but didn't think I could, and tried it. And that first draft, it had a lot of the world building there. It had the magic system. It had a lot of things there, but the characters weren't really fleshed out. I didn't really know how to do all of that. And so it took a lot of rewriting and rewriting and rewriting to figure out what I wanted to be on page and how do you make words into a character that feels real? Because you can say all you want. Oh, this person is sorrowful and occasionally, self-effacing and has some sarcasm, and that's a character. But it doesn't feel real until you let that person live in a space, interact with other people, get their reactions to events, and like figuring out actually how to make that person jump off the page was it was a huge learning curve. But I think it's the thing that I'm most proud of in that series, that I don't think you can read my books and not like them. You can read my books and think that this, that, the other went in a way that you didn't like, or was unpleasing, or you don't think is a good storytelling. But you can't read my books and say that Kalo and Tayan and the other cast of characters fall flat on the page. They are authentic. It's hard. It was hard for me to earn the confidence to say that, but these characters, they come off the page. They're authentic, living human beings, and you can get into their minds and you can feel like you understand them. And if nothing else, I'm extremely proud of that fact.
How do you mechanically discover those characters onto the page when you're starting from that first draft and you have this very fuzzy idea of this person? How did you get from that to this is a living, breathing person whom I know?
So I didn't know how to put this into words at this time. I was just kind of trying things out. But through reading other stories and grasping on to what I thought worked there, I kind of came to this idea that I needed to find the core of that person. So it's much more simplistic than actual people. We don't have one thing that drives us, right? But in a story that is not infinite, we have to narrow things down for a character to kind of jump off the page. And so I ended up finding just kind of the heart of what I thought this character's story was, and narrowing it down to just a single phrase that kind of drove them. And although the characters change, so Kalo as a character changes drastically, because you get his story in the present and the past, and you see him over the course of what, 20 years. and he changes drastically within that time. But there's still this underlying idea that sticks with him and makes him feel like the same person 20 years in the future to when you see him at his youngest. Um, and for Kalo, that was this idea of um, he makes the stories that other people tell about him, he uh, he accepts them no matter what they are, no matter if they're true, and that makes himself effacing. He thinks the lowest of himself at times, so that changes his personality. So this idea that he accepts these stories that are told about him, and I guess taking a step back, he has this ability to steal magic, which in his culture is seen as very taboo because there are stories about those who can steal magic in the past and the spirit that they get their gifts from, that in all of the stories the spirit thieves are the villains. And so they're outcasts in society. They're often uh, hurt physically or just abandoned. Um, and so he takes those stories and he accepts them as who he is. So even though he tries to do his best, and even though he really wants to make good on everything, he believes the worst about himself. And so that simple idea about who this character is allowed me to understand how he would respond to trauma. How would he respond to a loss? If even in a victory, how would he respond? If people cheered him on as a hero, which eventually he becomes this kind of legendary hero, that a folk hero that's talked about and people tell stories about. How would he respond to that kind of story if he believed himself to be at heart somebody who's broken, somebody who's destined to be the villain? If somebody said you're the hero, no, I'm not. If something goes wrong, of course it did, I'm the problem. And so by finding out that simple thing at the core of a character, I think I was able to realistically and authentically have him walk through life being affected and reacting to what was happening in his environment. And so all my characters have different seeds within themselves that I take as kind of a core personality trait that they're responding to. Um, and it actually takes a lot of writing for me sometimes to figure out what that character's core thing is going to be. But then once I do that, I'm able to uh, adjust their responses, adjust their dialogue, make them feel real because it all reflects back to that one point. And even the ways that they grow are either in response, like in spite of that, or because of that. So when he finally is able to accept himself, it's in contrast to that idea. Like it's pushing against it. So it's still there. That idea never goes away, even if he's trying to outgrow it.
It sounds like you're creating a touchstone for the character
Yeah.
that you can pretty much just bounce off every phase of his character go through. How is his relationship to this touchstone now?
Yeah.
Oh, I like that. That's nice. I'm gonna have to remember that because uh, I was definitely having a hard time with one of my characters, just trying to figure out like who she is, how she responds to things, like what is her personality in the moment. I know her goals, I know what she's going to do. I just don't understand how. And then I remember I was in a writing group and someone turned to me after reading one of the chapters and he just goes, "Oh yeah, she's a spider queen." And I just went, "Yes, you're right. That was the missing piece." So yeah, finding these touchstones are
Yeah.
phenomenal. Like
I
absolutely.
I think what really helped me figure out what I thought made a character work was reading the Greenbone Saga. Because
Ooh, I've read the first one. I need to
okay,
read the others.
so I'm not gonna spoil it for you, but the series takes place over like several decades. I'm not sure if it's 50 years, but it's close. Especially the last book has a lot of time jumps, and so it's pretty expansive in terms of the years it covers. And the character Hilo is maybe my favorite character I've ever read. Not because he like is, I always agree with him or this, that, or the other, but I think he is the best representation of a character that I've seen, of a character arc where still 50 years later he feels like Hilo, but the ways he's changed and adapted and grown all are in response to the person he was and what his beliefs are about the world. And so, if you read the first book, he's very committed to family. Like that is his thing. Whenever he's doing something, whether it's wrong, whether it's right, whether it hurts or helps, he's always trying to help family because it's the most important thing in the world to him. And that is the touchstone that throughout the whole series, even 50 years later, that's the touchstone. But things about how he sees women, how he sees, there's a gay character in the book, Andy, how he relates to the LGBT population, how he relates to the idea of fighting, because he's very hot-headed. And all of these things grow and change and twist, but all in relationship to, if he holds family the closest, how would he respond to this? And so that idea of a touchstone or a seed or whatever you want to call it ends up being very prominent in that character. That's where I first saw it as clearly as I do. And so I think reading that series was really helpful. But I think that's the way I've learned how to write, is by reading, 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 and then writing, and getting it wrong a bunch and trying to do better.
Yeah, reading is the second best way to learn to write, and the first is write.
Yeah.
It's like that's really all you need in order to get better at writing, is to read a lot and write a lot, and just pay attention to what you're reading and paying attention to what you're writing, and you will get better. Like there's no way you don't under that kind of situation.
As long as you have humility. Because I think that is also a thing where you have to believe that you are not perfect, or else you will never get better. Because if you think you're there, then why would you ever get better? Why would you ever need to change something? So I think there's always a humility that goes along with it. Um, ever since even when I was writing poetry, there was always the fear that the thing that I recently wrote, that I feel right now is the best that I've ever come up with, is going to be my best I'll ever write, and I'll never top it. And it takes time for the realization to actually, the last thing I wrote is probably going to be the worst thing moving forward. Because I'm always going to be improving on my craft. So every next thing I write will be better than the last. And that's at least the hope. That's, there's probably some bumps and troughs around along the way, but um, I hope to see my writing career that way when I'm done with it, and looking back at my works and saying, I love Malitu, but I've grown since then, and here's the reasons why. I hope to be able to talk about it like that.
No, that makes sense. I was talking with Alex Gagier, and we were kind of joking around about it. So he released his debut novel, Breaking, and we were making the joke that we hope that Breaking is the worst book he ever writes,
Yeah.
because you just want to incrementally get better.
Yeah.
And as long as you keep all those things in mind that we were talking about, you will. And Malitu will be the worst series you ever write, because you'll go on and you'll keep getting better and make better books, better stories, more real characters.
Yeah. And that's why people call it a craft. Like it's all about honing and learning and getting better at the tools we work with, which are words. Um and I can reread No Heart for a Thief right now, and I actually just did it a few weeks ago because I'm working on an audiobook, and so I wanted to go through and make notes for the narrator. And I can love the story still, but I can go, if I started that story today, I'd do it differently, or I'd write this scene differently. Um, and I can still appreciate it for what it is, and I can still really enjoy it as a novel, and still say like I've grown from this place.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think there are very few artists that look back on their past work and go, I could have done better.
Yeah.
Because you incrementally get better and you have skills now that you didn't have then. You have experiences now that you didn't have then, and
Yeah.
that shapes your art tremendously. I have this kind of notion that I've been percolating in the back of my mind for a while about this idea of, especially in writing, that most authors, you see them doing really well when they start getting into like their 30s and their 40s. And yes, there are younger authors out there that are killing it. Like the primest example being Polini when he was like back in high school and hustling with the Aragon series and stuff like
Hmm.
that. And we got like Caden Love, who's a younger fella who's kicking butt as well. But for the most part, you need to be seasoned with life to understand, to have that sympathy, that empathy for other people's situations that you haven't really experienced in order to create these stories. But you can't do that until you have these experiences, or at least it's more difficult to do so until you've seen other people other than yourself.
Yeah, I think that, you know, it's feels a little awkward where you're saying like people in their 30s and 40s, and I'm just past 38. Like, oh, so
Well, you
I
have a
need to
whole
be at the
series
peak
out
soon.
now. That's No, I'm not saying you're at your peak. I'm saying like this is the time where you start doing it. You're at the
Okay.
beginning, man. You got this.
Yeah.
Like like you have a whole series out now.
Oh.
Do you think you could have written this series as well as you did when you were like 22?
Oh, no. No, I agree with your point. I think that um so Juno Diaz is a literary fiction author. Are you familiar with his work?
I am not.
Yeah. He wrote Brief Life of the Wondrous Brief Life of Oscar Wilde, and a couple other really good books. But he also was a teacher of creative writing at MIT. And you might think MIT, why they have creative writing classes, but yes, they do. Um, and he's like, and he said, I actually appreciate creative writing from MIT students more than a traditional like MFA program, because the students at those writing programs where they want to be a writer, a career writer, and they're 20 years old, they all think they have the next best novel uh, ready to write right now, but they have no lived experience. They don't know how the world works in the way that you would in 20, 30 years. And so their viewpoint is limited, but they don't have the humility to understand that. And um, and because this is their dream, they don't want to go out and live life first before they write their novel. But for an engineering student who's doing this because they, are interested in what it's like to write a story and it's not their thing, they're willing to take chances, and they know it's not the next best, novel. It's not the next bestseller. It's, they're just playing. But for your student who's 20 years old and thinks this is going to be their career, they're going to be the next big name, they don't necessarily have the understanding to step back and live life with enough understanding and given enough time and experience to actually develop a story that could be the next best thing. So I mean, that's at least from his perspective. So I think uh, I agree with the sentiment that you can only get better with more experience, um, as long as you don't get too jaded by life.
Yes, yeah, you have to not take that too far. And
Yeah.
and I will also say, young people, I'm not bagging on you. Like most of us who started taking writing seriously like 30 plus wish we started at 22. Wish we started way younger because
Yeah.
we feel like we would be much farther in our craft at this point.
Yeah.
So that experience is so useful, but you do have to go out and live life and understand like how the world works, like you're saying.
If I didn't spend, I don't even know how many years I spent writing. I wrote poetry, I performed poetry, I did slams and all that kind of stuff. And if I didn't spend that much time writing poetry, my debut novel would have been awful. Because it doesn't have to be writing in one singular genre or one singular way. Learning how to use words and learning how to use them in different ways is, it's a learning. It's learning through experimentation. I wouldn't know how to edit if it weren't for poetry. So the idea of taking this thing that is a page long and working out all the kinks with repetitive language or metaphor that doesn't quite hit correctly, or overuse of any kind of literary trick. If you're not really digging into it at that granular level, then you don't necessarily understand your prose as much. And so you can do that through novel writing, you can do that through short stories, you can do it through any kind of craft. But for me, poetry was a great teacher in editing, in understanding the uh, the economics of language, of being very concise and knowing when to stop being concise and being more verbose, and digging into a point a little bit more, and bringing it out. And so it's that experience with not only life experience but that experience with writing. If I had published my debut novel and not had that kind of experience behind me, I would be, I'd be clicking the button on Amazon to make sure that was never seen again.
Oh. No, I'm glad you brought that up because I did want to ask you about your poetry and how it has influenced your novel writing now and your prose and such. Um, so it's good to know. It makes sense that it would mostly affect your editing because you do have to be very brutal and very economic and very cutthroat with like paring it down to the essential core
Yeah.
of your message in poetry. Like that's one of the things I do really like about poetry is like, yes, and flowery words are nice and I like to hear them. They're pleasant on my ear or just reading them. But
Hmm.
what poetry is really good at is very concisely conveying a lot of information.
Yeah. And so not only did I wrote what I would refer to as like page poetry, where I like submit to journals and things like that. But I did slam poetry and performance poetry, and so I competed on. I competed at the National Poetry Slam. I competed in a bunch of regional poetry slams. It was a fun time. But I think that also taught me how emotional and effective language could be. Like not only my own language, but watching people. And in a slam, typically you're limited to 3 minutes. So you have 3 minutes to recite a poem. And within 3 minutes, there are some poets that can more effectively touch my emotions than most novelists can in, 500-600 pages. And it is about the way language is used. It is about understanding when to use concrete and abstract language, um, how to touch the core of a person, um, through imagery, through metaphor, and by using these literary devices to really get at a point. Because so many things we feel are ephemeral; they're really hard to put into words. So the closest you can get is a metaphor. The closest you can get is imagery. And we can try to say, this character felt this way. And it will never read the way we intend it. It will never actually make the person reading it go, oh, I feel that too. But a metaphor can do that. An imagery can do that. Really good dialogue can do that. And so I think that's another thing that poetry taught me was the effectiveness of not just purple for the purpose of prettiness, but purple for the purposeness for purple with purposeness. There's a lot of P's in there. Um, but but the idea of being able to connect with somebody through the use of just this comparison that we draw through language, um, and that's why I love Name of the Wind, because yes, it is very purple, and for some people it's hard to get through. For me, it was one of the easiest reads I've ever had because I I just connected with the language, and every metaphor, every simile, every bit of imagery helped communicate much more concisely the the emotion that he was trying to evoke than if he had just written it plainly.
Yeah. There are some beautiful prose in that book.
Yeah,
Like I know that book can be like very divisive for a lot of people. Where they're
yeah,
like, I love it, I hate it, but no one on either side can argue against the fact that it is beautiful,
yes.
especially when he writes about music and how he
Hmm.
conveys the sound of music, because music is very emotional,
Yeah,
and it is absolutely beautiful what he comes up with to make you feel when Colt, I can't
both.
remember.
To
Colt,
both.
when he is playing
Yes.
music, you feel it on the page.
Yeah.
And like that's one of the things that you can do. Like one of the worst things that you can do with emotion on the page is he felt angry. Like naming the emotion is like the quickest way to kill it in my mind when I'm reading something. I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't feel this. But if you give me a metaphor, if you give me imagery, I will feel the rage. I will feel the sadness. I will feel the
Hmm.
joy. And I love that. That's why I love reading. Man.
It would kind of suck if you didn't love reading. That would
Yeah, that would make this whole business really hard.
when I when I speak to authors, and there are authors who are like, I don't really read. Like,
I
but
don't know
but
how.
how?
Yeah.
Then why are you here? And I don't
Yeah.
mean that to be divisive or like targeted. I
We just
just
don't understand.
and I also don't know how you get better. Um, like you can definitely get better just by writing and writing and writing. Um, but how are you not digging into the masters of the craft and seeing what they do with story and language? Um, I've heard the excuse that like, well, if I read other things and I might end up copying it unintentionally. Okay, every story has elements of 10 different stories. And we call it tropes, and they're genre conventions, but they also exist because the stories are reflective of one another. um I recently for the first time read Lord of the Rings, the first book. I still haven't read the rest of the trilogy. It's one of the red flags on my fantasy author. uh yes.
I am exactly there with you. I have read the first one. I have the other two, but I haven't gotten to them yet.
Yeah.
We're
um
bad fantasy authors.
yeah, I'll flagellate myself later. But um, when I was reading it, I really respected what was happening. I found it very interesting how much we have changed from that style of writing to what we currently have. I thought it was a very interesting story of just the growth of a fantasy genre from really one of its points of inception, because you can go all the way back to like what Beowulf and other stories like that to get fantasy. But yeah, but one of its points of modern inception and see how that genre has grown. And I was fascinated by that. I did not enjoy my time reading it. It's
Wait,
slow, it's
wait. I think I see
meandering.
the torches and pitchforks coming out for us
Yeah,
right now.
it's I love the movies. And I think that's part of why I had a hard time with it because I knew where the story was going. I'm like, get there. Um, but it takes its time. It understands that it has its own pacing. And that's great in some ways, but um, I guess I bring this up to explain that even though it's not the story for me, I learned from reading that story. I learned from not only the things that I liked about it, but also the things that I didn't like and I didn't want to repeat in my own storytelling. Um, and how I think storytelling like that could be more or less effective in today's market. I think if Lord of the Rings came out today, it would not really go anywhere. Um, and so I think reading is such an important part of being an author that yeah, I don't understand it when I understand you might not feel like you have the time, but I don't understand it when you say you don't read as an author.
No, I agree. Like
You know?
there's so much you can learn from reading things that you enjoy, but there's a lot, possibly even more, that you can learn from reading things you don't enjoy or are just plainly badly written. Like I've read a lot of bad books. Read a lot of great books, and I learned so much from both. I learned
Yeah.
very different things from both. Both
Yeah.
about like my taste, my style, and just being able to identify the things that I think don't work. I can then take to my own writing and be like, no, you can't name emotions. Take that out of there. You're killing the whole vibe of the scene.
Yeah. I can even read books that I don't like, but I understand why other people like and go like, "Oh, I can utilize that. That's a helpful takeaway." Um, you know, I read the Nevernight series and not my favorite series. Um, but the effectiveness of the character voice in Nevernight is really good. The effectiveness of the prose um, really helps sell voice. And although it didn't land with me, I understand why it lands with a lot of readers. And so, like, that was one of my goals with this novella that's a part of Ethos. It was this very voicey first person narrative. I wanted I wanted the prose to really feel hand in hand with the character and try to evoke that. And it was a that's one of the things I like about not writing within a current series is I can try out something new. And so very voicey, very like the the pacing of the prose follows the character's inner monologue almost and gets into it. Like I don't know if you've read Timothy Wolf's what is the Whisper that killed God or something like that.
No, but it's on my TBR. Like it looks good.
It so if you're interested in a very voicey short read, really great one. Um Almost in some ways fourth wall breaking at times, really you're living in the body of someone who sees the world in a completely different way than most rational people do, and everything is through that lens, and it really twists the story in interesting ways. And so I think there's really fun things to do to play with that. I enjoyed that much more than Nevernight. But I think that's the first time where I saw that really evocative voice work. Um, and so I think that's something I like to play with here and there, and we'll see how it continues. I think I'll be continuing a series within that same world from the Ethos novella and digging into that a little bit more. Um, I'm playing with a few different worlds right now.
I'm gonna say you have your series is finished now, so you're
Yeah.
a free agent when it comes to looking for the next big venture. But something I did really want to ask you before we
Yeah.
get to the end of our time here is what this is to me one of the most important questions that I ask everybody, and that is at what moment in your journey in your career did you feel like an author?
In some ways, I don't know if I'm there because if somebody asked me if I meet somebody new on the street, I'm not necessarily gonna introduce myself as author. Um, to the people in my neighborhood and the parents of the kids my kids play with, I don't introduce myself as an author. I talk about my day job when they ask what I do. Um, and so in that way, I still feel like I don't know if I'm necessarily there. I've finished a full series. I've been at this for almost 3 years since I published the first one. And I still feel like there's a little bit of imposter syndrome, um, especially when people ask, "Oh, is that self-published?" Because there is, regardless of how I feel about indie publishing and self-publishing, there still is an internalized chip on my shoulder about the idea people have around self-publishing and what that means about the quality of my stories and the quality of my work. Um, and so I still find it hard to really claim that author title at sometimes. And then when I'm in the community, I feel that quite easily. I think I could feel that as soon as I published my first book, I was able to claim that. So I think it's contextual. Um, and it also depends on where I'm at in my life, how or in my world, that how comfortable I even feel talking about my books. I had a colleague the other day bring it up like, "Oh, I didn't know you were an author," and it came out of nowhere. I had no idea how she even knew, um, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, I am." And so I didn't really. It felt like a weird place to just dig into. And here's what my stories are about. Blah blah blah. Like it felt weird to go into author mode there. Um, so I can be very self conscious in those spaces when the worlds collide.
Well, I hope you have more confidence with it in the future because you have finished a
Yeah.
whole series, which there are so many people out there that write and write and write and never finish a book, and they stop because of one of many reasons. Whether they decide, you know what, this isn't the dream I thought it was, or life just happens to them. But you've
Yeah.
done it. Like you have written an entire series. That's amazing, and I think you should be proud of
I am very proud of it.
it.
I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud of the work. I think at times I can get into um, I can get in my head about how successful I feel that it's been. I've sold a few thousand copies. I've gotten my book out there and people have read it. It's been pretty well reviewed. But yeah, the average person has not heard of it and probably never going to hear of it. And um, even in indie spaces, there are people that will never hear of my book, and it will never be the big thing on r/fantasy or this, that, or the other. And so I I think my expectation and my hope and my dream for where this story would have been is in very stark contrast to the success I've seen. And so it's hard for me to validate the success that I've seen for myself. Because yes, if I step back, I can go, yes, there have been really big successes and there have been really cool things that have happened with this story. But then I get into my ego where it's like, yeah, but it hasn't done this, and it hasn't done this, and it hasn't gotten this accolade. And what are your sales this month? And blah 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 blah. And so those two internal beings are constantly at war for like, how are you going to feel about it today?
That makes a lot of sense. Like I think a lot of people can relate to that experience, especially going through this really incredible and difficult journey that we have all chosen for
Yeah,
ourselves. But I think that is a really poignant part to start wrapping up this episode. James, thank you so much. Could you tell the people, one, where can they find you? Where can they find your book or
yeah,
books?
definitely. So you can find me on Twitter, on Blue Sky, Instagram. You can find me on my website, jamesldulin.com. Join my newsletter. I send out just an email a month. I'm not going to flood your inbox, but I'll send you an update on where I am and what's going on with my writing. Any sales that might be coming up, things like that. And then, yeah, my books are available. You can get signed editions on my website. You can get copies from Amazon. You can get them from Barnes and Noble. Pretty much anywhere you can get a book online, you can find copies of my books.
Most excellent. James, again, thank you so much for coming on to the show today. And folks, we will have him back on next week as we talk about the debate of art versus artist. All right, folks. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight. And until next time, let's be author adjacent together. Awesome. Oh, man. I barely touched any of the questions. I think I only asked my one question, which to me is just important. But everything else was just pure vibes, man.
Good Sorry job. If I rambled on too much.
No, that is what I want. It makes my job easy.